we want things to kind of move quite seamlessly tonight. We're going to have members of the circle who, Gordon Miller and Henry Locke, who are going to lead us in some Taizé chants and kind of open up the spiritual mood within us. And then Beth is going to lead some breath exercises. So we thought you should know who she is before she does that. But just before we get into that, there's a couple of things. This wouldn't have happened and you wouldn't have had a place to sit today if Carol Martin and Megan from Cadbury Bay had not been here doing tons and tons and tons of work. So they're also on the circle and we want to thank them. And then, but we do need your help. Because tonight, the whole setup needs to change. So tomorrow, you're going to be around tables. You'll still have the comfortable chairs to sit in, but they'll be in a new configuration, provided some of you who are able and willing to set up chairs and tables tonight will stay and give us a hand. Okay? That would be very much appreciated. Now, did you see the email, everybody who was registered for this, that there's a few people who are thinking about going to Smuggler's Pub after this? It is, I think it is a tradition that was started shortly after 1925, that people who attended church events in this largely abstinent church always found a place to congregate after and to talk over the results of the meeting and what they were learning. So we just want to continue that very, very good and time-honored tradition. So by all means, anybody thinking about coming to the pub? Put your hands up. Tomorrow night would be better. Okay, we got one. A few people. Okay, so think about it while you're doing this, because there's going to be lots to talk over. You know what? We felt very, very thrilled as a circle group to know that we could have Beth Estock come and talk with us. That felt like a wonderful opportunity. Many of us heard her when she was in Parksville, and I had the privilege of talking to her. And I have to tell you that even though she started out as a United Methodist minister and was in congregation and doing the seeding of new communities of faith, she really made, I think, a wonderful turn in her career when she went into full-time coach work and consulting work, because I got to spend some time with her and she was very insightful and helpful. So I feel like we've got someone who's passionate and gifted in helping other people discover paths and helping the church find a way to be true to our essence, but way out there in terms of our forms. And so I'm really thrilled you're here, Beth, and we want to welcome you. And we're going to get ready for the day, but you don't get to speak yet. Over to you folks.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm very delighted about this evening and this whole weekend, spending some time with you. Let's shift our attention for a moment as we enter into that prayerful space of opening up our hearts and minds to the presence of God. And notice that it requires a little bit of different way of thinking. It's not our ordinary way of thinking. We're kind of making a choice to shift. And we have these wonderful Taizé songs that help us to open up hearts and minds and experience and feel the presence of God in us and around us, in this space, within and between each one of us. These songs, the Taizé songs, are a bit like love songs. they're not so much words that need to be thought. They are loving words that need to be expressed through voice and song and vibration and harmony. And as we sink into the singing, we sink into this deeper place within ourselves, that place where heart connects in with spirit, where our ordinary ways of thinking are placed aside for a moment, when we're entering into that deep relationship with God who is with us in this space. This is called Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Some of you may know it from before with slightly different words, which is Lord to Yahweh in that good progressive Christian fashion. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name.
Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into love. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into life. Bless Yahweh, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless Yahweh, my soul, who leads us into love. In God alone, my soul can find rest and peace. In God, my peace and joy. Only in God, my soul can find its rest. Find its rest and peace. In God alone my soul can find
Thank you for those two beautiful songs. The first one, the Yahweh, just reminded me of a story that Richard Rohr talks about in his book, The Naked Now. How many of you are familiar with Richard Rohr? Yeah. He talks about having a conversation with one of his rabbi friends. And they're talking about the word Yahweh. And the rabbi mentioned that the sound Yahweh, which has no vowels in it, is actually the sound of breathing. We come into this world and our first breath is God. And we leave this world and the last thing we say is God. Every time we breathe is a prayer to God. Isn't that beautiful? So I invite you now to close your eyes, and we are just going to do a really quick breath prayer. And I hope your bellies aren't too full of dinner, because we're going to breathe through our bellies. So I invite you to imagine that your belly is a balloon. And you are going to inhale through your belly and blow up that balloon as much as possible. And then on your exhale, you're going to squeeze all the air out of that balloon, taking the air back to your spinal column. And then before you take your next breath in, you're just going to release that contraction and take another breath. Okay? So here we go. Close your eyes. Let's take a big belly breath in. And then squeeze that air all the way back to our spinal column. And before we take our next in-breath, just release that contraction. And just simply breathe normally. We're going to do it again. So breathe in that big balloon in your belly. And contract it back into your spinal column, but this time move that contraction up underneath your rib cage. And then let go. And take a nice, normal breath. And we're going to do it one more time. Breathing through the belly. And then exhaling back into the spinal column. And this time into the pelvic floor. Just taking that squeeze. And then release. This is an automatic relaxation exercise that actually helps you relax. Some of you guys know that, right? Yeah? Maybe some of you that do martial arts or
Kegel exercises.
Or Kegel exercises, yeah. But when I'm in a place and I'm not quite there yet, if I can just focus on my breath, and in particular that kind of breathing, I can just show up. So I hope we've showed up now. Have we showed up? Okay. So now out of this beautiful, quiet, peaceful thing, we're going to do something else here. Maybe. Maybe not. Wow. Oh, did too far, huh? Should we try it again? Oh, and there's no sound. There it is. that for myself, so thank you for allowing me to do that. Just a little bit more about me. I've been blessed the last 6 years as a coach and consultant, as Cheryl said, traveling all over North America, working with churches who are trying to find new life in the midst of decline, as well as coaching people who are trying to innovate fresh expressions of what it is to be a community of faith in the 21st century. So in 2016, Paul Nixon and I, we co-wrote the book, Weird Church, to bless all those new unfoldings and to help move the conversation along to what is coming next. And that's why I'm excited to be here tonight. So I thank you for coming out on a Friday night and for inviting me here. So I come to you tonight aware that I am not a Canadian. And I'm sorry about Donald Trump. I also confess that I know you know much more about my history and culture than I know about yours. I do read the New York Times, and I do try to read that Canadian section of the New York Times that comes out. I have a daughter that attends university in Squamish. So I want you to know that Weird Church book was written primarily based on our experience working with churches in the United States. So for these next couple days, I hope that you can make the necessary connections to your context, okay? I'll be making some generalizations tonight based on my context that I hope that you can find in yours as well. So show of hands, let's talk context. How many of you are experiencing decline in your worship service? Okay. How many of you are experiencing an aging congregation? Okay. How many of you are seeing a decline in gifted leaders? Financial constraints. Lack of children and young adults. Okay, I think we're in similar contexts. I often get a sense that as mainline Christians, progressive Christians at that, we just don't understand the significance of our work in times like this. Too often we get stuck as we look at church decline and the growing numbers of spiritual but not religious people with dread, as if we're looking off a cliff and there's no way but down. And we have multiple responses to this. Denial, trying to turn back time, trying harder at what we are already doing in an attempt to make church great again. Yeah. Should I move this someplace else?
It's your microphone.
Yeah, I think maybe I got it now. Did it? Can you?
It's the body back.
Maybe I'll just set it right here. Okay.
It's not on there.
Oh, it's that? But it's not on right now. Oh, that's because it's unplugged. Okay. It's too close to my mouth. Is that better? Does that look better? Okay. Are we good?
Yeah.
Yay! Okay. That'd be terrible to have to sit through that, huh? Okay. Not only is that attempt to make church great again unrealistic, but I find it quite depressing. How about you? Oh my gosh, all of you sitting in here tonight are faithful people. You wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't care deeply about your congregations. And I have a hunch that those of you sitting here tonight give many, 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 many hours to your congregations, right? Yeah. And what used to work doesn't work anymore. And how many of you find it depressing yourself that what you used to be able to do or what used to work is not producing the results that it once did? Is that depressing for you? Yeah, I find it depressing. So I think what we need to do is we just need to end that kind of approach to how we're doing things. So today, I first want to provide us a framework and a vocabulary to help us shift perspectives and gain more clarity about why the church, and in particular, the Progressive Mainline Church, is so needed today, and what we need to be aware of in order to be open to the movement of God in the 21st century. We are not losers, people. We are not. But in order to understand where we're going, we need to first understand where we are right now. So, I want to offer us a metaphor as we take this step back and get a broader perspective. And to help us do that, let's just look at some trees. In particular, the beauty of the Pacific Northwest and our old-growth forests. Many of you might know already that spruce and fir trees follow a 500-year cycle of birth, growth, and death. Did you know that? It reminds me of Phyllis Tickle's book, The Great Emergence. She says that every 500 years there's a theological garage sale. And we're in the middle of one right now. This is a sign in the Olympic National Forest in the state of Washington. And the sign says, "Standing dead but filled with life." Wow, what if we looked at the church in that way, in that kind of life cycle? We're standing. We're filled with life. And our life cycle, as we know it, is on the wane, right? But there's a gift to that. The dying trunks give birth to new life. The forest is still there. The next generation of trees are incubating. We might consider ourselves in this room tree doctors. But we have to remember that we do that because we love the forest, right? It's not about tree growth, but forest health and wholeness. It's the ecosystem of shalom that we are most concerned about. So today we're going to step back, tonight we're going to step back and we're going to look at the forest through the trees and what does the unfolding of God's kingdom look like in the 21st century. And we're going to do this through the framework of spiral dynamics. Now, did all of you get in your mailbox?
Yes.
Okay. How many of you were able to read it or look at it? How many of you were able to make sense of it? Okay. I'm glad that some of you were able to look at it, and because we're going to take a really fast journey through the spiral dynamics, and I hope that after you've read it and after we have a conversation tonight that you'll really be able to get a sense of what we're talking about. So, I was first introduced to spiral dynamics 16 years ago, and it's helped me make sense of this rapidly changing world. It's given me compassion for people that I don't understand. It's helped me think about the unfolding of church, and I hope this framework is a gift to you as well. So what is spiral dynamics? Spiral dynamics is a map of living systems It charts the evolution of the emergence of human development, both individually and collectively. It allows us to better understand where we have been, where we're going, and we can use this framework more clearly to see the future of the church. This developmental model kind of follows along the lines of maybe Erickson's 8 stages of development or James Fowler's stages of faith. Any of you familiar with developmental psychology, right? The research was based on 40 years of research that Claire Graves did. He started in 1952. He was a developmental psychologist at Union College in Schenectady, New York. He was a contemporary of Abraham Maslow, and they had some very interesting conversations together. Okay? Don Beck then took his research, developed it further, and then co-wrote a book with Christopher Cohen called Spiral Dynamics in 1996. Don Beck actually was instrumental in South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Program. And he worked with world leaders on major change initiatives. And if you've watched that movie, Invictus, he was the rugby team psychologist for the Springboks. And he was instrumental in getting Mandela there at the end of the game to put on the Springbok jersey. Okay. So here's the premise of spiral dynamics. I went too far. Wrong way, sorry. Okay. Spiral dynamics, here's the premise. As our life conditions change, we forge new systems and ways of thinking and behaving. In other words, we change our psychology and rules for living to adapt to the new conditions in which we find ourselves. And each value system along the spiral is important, and it's needed for our development. So just like any stages of development theory, we can't jump levels. For example, an infant cannot become a teenager overnight. An infant has to go through developmental levels, right? When we do go through these developmental stages, we transcend the old and we include the new. So everything that came before is a part of us as well. And these value systems are expressed in people, but are not mistaken for types of people. So we're not talking about Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram here. We're talking about the value system in which a person might find themselves and operate out of. Okay? So a meme code is like a cultural wave. It's a value system. It's a social stage. They're fluid, they're living systems. They form spirals of complexity that exist within people and organizations and entire societies. These are the intelligences that glue bonds of people together. They define who a people are. They reflect the place on the planet that people inhabit. And they are all legitimate expressions of the human experience. But they're not equal in their capacities to deal with the complexities and the problems in society today. So once a new stage appears in culture, it will spread its instructional codes and life priority messages throughout the culture. The religion, the economics, the political arrangements, the psychological, anthropological theories, the views of human nature, all of the patterns, these value codes have expression in and change. So different societies, cultures, and subcultures, as well as entire nations, are at different levels in this spiral. And they're displayed in these levels of complexity. And these value systems are like growth rings of a tree. You transcend the old and include it. And it's important to understand that we need all of these value systems in order to be whole. We can't cut the middle of the tree out and say that we're whole. We can't expect people or cultures to be someplace where they're not. Unfortunately, as in Donald Trump. But I digress. Okay. And as we move through these value systems, we move from individual to communal, back to individual and communal. So there's this kind of pattern to it. I know that's a lot of information to take in, and I'm glad you have some cheat sheets on that. But as we get more in this, you'll be able to understand why I had to say all that at the beginning, okay? So what we're going to do right now is we're just going to walk through all of the different stages in this. Oh, I'm going to do this first. Okay. So when these stages, when a new value system comes on board, the first thing is they're in the embryonic stage. They identify the values that we need in order to solve the problems that we're facing right now. Then those values are implemented, and then those values begin to break down once those problems have been met. Right now, we're in a point of disintegration in our North American culture. Okay? Okay, here we go. We're going to start 250,000 years ago. The birth of Homo sapiens, right? Our ancestors used their instincts and habits just to survive and get their basic needs met. Every human being begins at this stage of just getting basic needs met. When a baby is born, what does a baby need? Food, shelter, right? Just really basic needs. And we can revert back to getting just the basic needs met when there's some sort of catastrophe that happens, right? You're beginning to hear a little bit of Maslow in that too? Yeah. Okay, the second period in our history, about 10,000 years ago, after the end of the Ice Age, when small bands of people began bumping into each other and they began competing for resources, they began to form tribes. And they practiced mutual reciprocity. This is where we get rituals and magic and superstition and elders and ancestors and the concept of the clan. Nothing is owned in these cultures. It's all shared. The birth of the individual has not happened yet in this epoch. It's a sharing-based economy. Okay? We see this today as we might wear our lucky socks when our favorite team is playing, you know? Or we have some lucky something that we hold on to when we need it. That's part of this value system getting expressed in us. And then what happened is that once we got those safety and security needs met of the tribes, people began questioning the rituals of the elders, and they began questioning, why do we have to all do the same thing and pay attention to in the same way? There was this desire to break away and become free, and the ego was born. Okay? This worldview expresses itself as impulsive, creative, energizing. Those are great qualities, aren't they? But also dominating and aggressive. This value system is egocentric. It enjoys the self to the fullest without regret or guilt. Guilt has not come on board yet. Think of 2-year-olds, rebellious teenagers. Think of Donald Trump. Okay? Authoritarian regimes, the Wild West. Winners and losers, alpha male, power is key to survival, the strong man always wins, and I mean man, right? Never apologize. Actually divert anything to blaming other people, right? It's very egocentric stage of development. But it also has some good aspects to it because it can break out in novel ways. You know, you see a little bit of this in innovators, like in a Steve Jobs, or in people that kind of like bust out and do something new. It's that kind of energy. But again, how Steve Jobs accessed that is different than how Donald Trump accesses it, for sure. So then we move to the birth of the major faith traditions about 5,000 years ago. If we have all this acting out in this Wild West kind of mentality, and right makes, might makes right, power over, what do we need in order to counter that? We need the sheriff in town. We need law and order. We need to enforce a code of conduct that brings about stability and laws and discipline and a healthy dose of guilt. And in this stage, we move from that egocentric to more of the communal. We move into ethnocentric realm, right? The positive of this worldview is it helps us build character and moral fiber. Think of the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. Think of the military. Think of the church. Many of the salt of the earth people who are anchors in our communities have really strong blue sense of value in their core, because this is a traditional value system. This value system helps people get a fresh start. You can see that displayed in like boot camps, 12-step groups. You also have to think about the birth of all the major faith traditions, patriotism, the Protestant work ethic, Robert's Rules of Order. That's all this value system. But there's a shadow to that value system too. The pursuit of salvation in the form of imperialism and manifest destiny. And both of our nation's histories, we have this as part of it, don't we? Saving the savages. You're either with us or you're against us. We're battling the forces of evil. If any of you have seen the church lady on Saturday Night Live, she embodies this value system. And this value system can show up at the ends of the spectrum. Fundamentalist groups of all persuasions, including atheists. When blue is engaged in an unhealthy way, it is intolerant. And we also have to remember that in this value system, slavery is accepted in all the major faith traditions. We have to know the role of women was subservient and in this value system as well. So what happens when we have law and order? I mean, when we're feeling safe and there's law and order, then we can focus on other things. And hence we get the Enlightenment. We get the birth of the scientific revolution. The orange value system shows up once blue stabilizes the world. And as this happens, we move again from that communal more to the individual success and achievement. The United States was formed out of this value system. Democracy, freedom, liberty, technology, competitiveness, Wall Street, the emerging middle class, the Industrial Revolution. So words that encapsulate this value system are free market, profit, entrepreneur, strategic plan, metrics, business models, purpose-driven. This is a modern value system. Are those some of the words that that resonate in your church committees maybe sometimes? Yeah, right. We see it show up in the church through prosperity gospels and mega churches. But we also see this happening in this value system. Religion doesn't make sense anymore. Because scientifically, I know that lightning isn't God's will. It's just atmospheric electricity discharging from positive to negative. Okay? So, religion doesn't make sense. There's a big split that happens. Religion then becomes owned by the blue value system. And science becomes owned by the orange value system and reason. And there's this big split. Science declares war on religion, and religion declares war on science. And here we're beginning to see some of the culture war coming in, aren't we, in this split. Hence we have the phrase spiritual but not religious, because religious is connected with what? That fundamental blue traditional value system. And people nowadays think that all religion is a pre-modern mythic religion that's never grown up. So it would be like going into a doctor's office today and having them put leeches on your body as a form of healing. No other lines of development are as stuck as the spiritual line of development. You get that?
You say that again, please?
Yeah, so in this orange value system, since science has become the God, religion is owned by the value system that came before. Does that make sense now? And in this value system that's pre-modern, pre-scientific, when you went to a doctor back then, they did put leeches on your body. And so when we walk into churches today, it's like they're putting leeches on our body. In terms of the spiritual line hasn't been able to grow along the value system. It's been frozen right here. Okay? This tension we're not just seeing in the U.S., but we're seeing all over the world with terrorist groups, right? The red value system, the blue value system, and the orange value system, they're just slamming into each other like great tectonic plates. Terrorism says this: the modern orange worldview will not make room for my sacred beliefs of blue, so I'm going to blow the orange world up. Okay? Now, what I would say about those terrorist groups is they're really operating out of a red value system, and they've co-opted the language of the blue value system. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has done as well. So in the orange value system, motivations are largely economic and bottom line. People with money become our cultural icons. Okay. Success is geared around how much money are you making, right? What kind of lifestyle are you living? And then green comes on board in the 1960s. Yeah. When people begin to question all that affluence and the excesses of orange, you know, if technology was supposed to be our savior, it failed. Now we have weapons of mass destruction. We have global warming, right? This value system moves from a reliance on rationalism into the interior spaces of feelings. So caring for people, equality for all, consensus processes, reconciliation, sensitivity training are what happens in this value system. Think of the Beatles. Liberation theology, feminism, LGBTQ rights, Black Lives Matter, political correctness, national health care, farm-to-table food, recycling, This is the postmodern value system. This is the sea in which all of us here are swimming in the Pacific Northwest, correct? Yeah. And folks, particularly millennials, this is what they have to say. You are wrong about the sun going around the earth. You are wrong about slavery. You're wrong about women's suffrage. You're wrong about civil rights. You're wrong about the LGBTQ. Why would I want to pay any attention to you? Again, the culture sees religions in that blue traditional value system, right? And who are the folks that are moving that along? You guys sitting here, because you're operating out of this value system, aren't you? That's why the world needs us so badly right now. This is where we can have the most leverage. I found this quote quite compelling. He says, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Da, 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 da. Here comes the church. Yeah. We are the people that can interpret the religious myths in a way that makes sense to people today. And this is our work of the 21st century. So we need to be taking our Bible stories and the mythologies of the faith that we hold dear and helping people that live out of this value system to connect in a way that speaks to them. Okay? Okay, so before I go on, I want to say that there's a blind side to the green value system. And that is that all truth is relative. This is so typical of a green value system statement. I will tolerate your difference as long as you tolerate my difference. I will welcome your expression of diversity as long as you welcome my expression of diversity. Right? But green has a difficult time with any kind of hierarchy, and they see actually spiral dynamics as an oppressed, privileged perspective as well. And that ends my notes. I'm just going to walk back into my bag back here and see if I can find these notes. Anybody have any questions so far? Any questions?
Just on the last things you said, you referred to the Greens
Yeah.
having some antipathy to hierarchy.
Yes.
You want to elaborate on that a little?
Yes, I would like to elaborate on that. So,
Can you repeat the question?
yes, so green has antipathy to hierarchy. So, there are two different kinds of hierarchy. There's a hierarchy of, there's an organic kind of hierarchy, you know, atoms, molecules, atoms, organisms, you know, there's that kind of hierarchy. And then there's dominator hierarchies. Green value system lumps all of those hierarchies together. And you can't see a difference between dominator hierarchies with natural hierarchy. Does that make sense? Yeah. In the green value system, Many nuns and done millennials think that all Christians are fundamentalists, right? The green value system, another way how this gets played out is that on college campuses right now, a lot of people have been disinvited to speak. The orange value system, one of the values of an orange value system is freedom. It shifts to equality in the green value system. And so how that gets played out with these free speech issues and how the alt-right has gotten into all this is that a green value system says, if you won't recognize me as equal to you, I won't recognize your freedom of speech. Where the orange value system says, freedom trumps equality, and green says no. Equality is more important than freedom. You see how complex this is getting? Okay, let me see where we are in our notes. Okay, here we go. Okay, now we're going to go to the second tier. So this is the first tier that Claire Graves said the whole first 6 colors of the spiral, really, they're really interested in basic needs, basic survival needs. And the underlying kind of feel of all that is fear. They're operating out of a basis, they're responding or reacting out of a basis of fear. But then you jump to the second tier, and you drop the fear, and you get curious simply about being alive. You know, Jesus has a lot to say about this. Actually, the Bible has a lot to say about this. You know, angels show up all the time, and what's the first thing they say? Fear not. Right. So, this comes on board maybe about, I don't know, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. And what were we doing? We were actually able to see the planet for the first time, weren't we? You know? These spaceships, these rockets that propelled, that helped us to see our little planet Earth. And for the first time, we saw, oh my gosh, like, we're all connected. So for the first time, we can see the planet itself as a total ecosystem. For the first time, the world's connected to all of the value systems at once. The ethnic tribes, the egocentric warlords, the isms, the opportunists, the materialists, the postmoderns, all the religions. And all of them are bubbling up at the same time, and these systems are clashing together with the potential to wipe out the entire planet. For example, right now we have weapons of mass destruction that was created in an orange value system in the hands of the red value system despots. That's some scary stuff right there, isn't it? Right? June 2017, an article from the New York Times said the most salient political division today is not between conservatives and liberals in the United States or social democrats in the United Kingdom and France, but between nationalists and globalists, ethnocentric blue and pluralistic and world-centric orange and green. That's the big clash. And that's what we see happening, particularly in the United States right now with Donald Trump trying to, not become a global player, right? The issue for the yellow value system is, I'm not going to go there yet, is the restoration of the world, right? So that life may continue. So the movement to second tier is like this. It's like being on a dance floor and you're solely focused on your own dance. That's what the first 6 value systems are like. And then when you move to the second tier, it's like you have a balcony position, and you can see all the value systems at play all over the world. and we actually have the capacity to look objectively instead of reacting. Okay? All of the value systems are needed to make our world a healthy place, and the solutions to the first-tier problems can only be found in second-tier balcony approaches. When all of the value systems can express themselves in healthy ways. So it's not our job to try to change somebody's values, but to call them to a healthy expression of the values that they have. Okay? So here we go. And see, green value system people don't like that at all. Because we're right and you're wrong. Right? Okay, so we're going to go to yellow. This is the leap to the second tier. This is a very exciting time in history. For the first time, this is the system that can see all of the other value systems. People are operating in this yellow value system. They think and act from an inner directed core. They're free to be and do as they choose. They don't not only think outside the box, but they've moved outside the box. They're able to access knowledge on multiple levels. They're comfortable with paradox. They're comfortable with taking both and perspectives instead of either or perspectives. They can integrate facts and feelings and instincts. And they're really focused on leveraging the gifts they have for what is at hand. So think of people and organizations using chaos and systems theories, experimenting with distributive leadership groups. It's a very small percentage of people right now. It's estimated about 1% of the people on the planet operate out of this value system. Some of the people that I see operating this value system are Margaret Wheatley. Are you familiar with her work? Nadia Bolz-Weber. I see her operating out of this. James Baldwin, who was an African American, he's since died, but he was a man way ahead of his time. He upset both white and black people when he was writing. Let's go on. This is the value system where we can have conversations with people of different faith traditions. And it's entirely possible to be a rational Christian, following the universal teachings of Christ, but without having to insist that Christianity is the only exclusive path to God, and without having to literally believe in the myths of the virgin birth and the parting seas and the satanic fruit. At the same time, it's entirely possible to be a postmodern Christian calling into question the pitfalls of the ego-boosting path of least resistance spiritual grazing of New Age consumers. It's the rebirth of the contemplative traditions. It's when orthodoxy wanes and orthopraxy comes on board. It's when belief goes not away, but it's just turned aside, and we're more interested in the practice of becoming the beloved community. Okay? Let's see, what else do I want to say about that? This is the big question in the yellow value system. How can we live in a world with so many conflicting value systems and maintain our existence on the planet? Does that kind of keep you up at night sometimes? It does me too. And then 30 years ago, the turquoise value system came on board, and this has to do with mystical capacities. It sees the entire spiral as spiritual, and it's the upward ladder of human emergence that's spirituality itself. Wonder, awe, reverence, humility, unity, simplicity. It experiences the wholeness of existence through mind and spirit and mystical sensibilities, and is able to connect everything with everything else in some sort of ecological alignment. I think of people that touch on this: Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeois, the Dalai Lama. You get that sense? Very, very few people can operate at, like we touch on these things, but to just kind of hang out there, very few people do that. So what I want to say is, almost every Christian denomination was born out of the blue value system. Okay? And in North America, we have the blue and the orange value system that we grew up with in our churches. So right now, I would say that that's where the majority of churches are, in that blue-orange value system. But what's happened is our culture has moved to the green and into the yellow value system. And no longer the containers of the blue and the orange value system of what church is works in a green or a yellow value system. Does that make sense? The other thing we have to understand is that each of the first 6 tiers think that its worldview is correct and it's the best perspective. And it reacts negatively if challenged. It lashes out. It uses its own tools whenever it's threatened. Just, Donald Trump with these bombs going off. What does he do? He blames everybody else. I mean, that's just so part of a red value system. The blue value system is very comfortable with, is uncomfortable with the red impulsiveness and orange individualism. Orange individualism thinks that blue order is for suckers, and green reacts strongly to blue, orange, and anything that's post-green. So, given that, I want you guys to have a conversation. What value memes do you see that you kind of, you find your home in? I can say that I have a center of gravity in one, but when I go home for Thanksgiving, I'm operating in a blue value system. Right? When I was a mother to young children, you better believe they had timeouts, and that was a blue value system expression. Right? But there's a value system in which kind of we have our center of the gravity. So what would that be for you? What would it be for your church, and what would it be for the neighborhood that your church is in? So I invite you to circle up with about 2, 3, 4 people and have a conversation for about 5 or more minutes. Okay?